All right, welcome to the Exam 1 review. So here's how this is going to work. This is an actual exam that I have used in the past. So these are real questions that I've used in the past in a real exam. We're going to go through each one of them. If you get the question right, you'll just go to the next question. If you get the question wrong, it'll take you to an explanation of what you should be looking for and then send you back to the question so that you can get it right. So you may not see a video between if you get the question right, then you'll get it right. If you get it wrong, then you'll hear the explanation. All right, so let's go ahead and begin. All right, question 1. Which of the following is an animal according to the law? Okay, now remember, the law meaning there's the Animal Welfare Act and then the PHS. The PHS is the Public Health Service. And essentially what that means is that anything that is an invertebrate is not an animal. So according to the law, a mouse is an animal because it has a spine. An octopus and a lobster, they don't have a spine, so they're not an animal. Question 2. Which of the following would not be considered human subjects research? Okay, now remember, there's two things we need to consider when we think about human subjects research. Number one, are we talking about human subjects? And in which case, human subjects, they have to be identifiable human subjects. It's not archived data that came from somewhere else. It came from living human subjects, right? And they're not passed away as well. If it's research, then it's something that's meant to be published, meant for the general knowledge, meaning publishing, all right? So for example, an anthropologist interviewing college students about student loans, well, the anthropologist is a researcher who's trying to publish, so that would be human subjects. The only one that would not be intended for public publication is the one about surveys with workplace conditions, right? So if I am an employer and I am trying to figure out how to improve the workplace that I have, and I take a survey with my own employees, that is not human subjects research. Yes, there's human subjects, but it doesn't count as research because it's meant only for internal use. Number 3, the 3 R's are most closely associated with, if you remember, the 3 R's are reduce, replace, refine, right? Reduce, replace, refine. So that's talking about animals. So when you're looking at that, which one of those has to do with animal ethical treatment? That's what you should be thinking about. Question 4. All right, so the participant is asked to jump out of an airplane in order to study surprise. Well, okay, so this is asking what is this a problem with? Let's go through each of the options. Respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. Those are the principles from the Belmont Report, which are the basics of ethical treatment of human subjects in the United States, which is used for the common law, which is the law regarding ethical treatment of human subjects in the United States. So respect for persons has to do with confidentiality. It has to do with informed consent. Respect, that's the respect for persons idea. Beneficence is, does the good outweigh the bad? Does the good outweigh the bad? And justice means that is this group, is whoever the human subject is, if the group that they belong to, like the ethnic, religious, or whatever group that they belong to, being unduly influenced or unduly participating in too much of the research burden. So based off of that, I think you can answer the question. Question 5. Which one of these had the most effect on the law concerning human subjects? Well, the law concerning human subjects is based off of a document that has beneficence, justice, and respect for persons in it. It's the Belmont Report. So the Nuremberg Code came first, right? That's directly after World War II in response to Nazis' use of human subjects during the Holocaust. The Declaration of Helsinki is an international treaty that the United States and other countries are part of for human subjects. PHS is the Public Health Service, which now regulates the law concerning it, but the Belmont Report was the one that most directly influenced the law today. Number 6, I counted how many Oreo cookies I ate yesterday. What kind of data did I collect? All right, one cookie is one cookie. 2 cookies exactly twice as many cookies. And so the number actually means more of something. So automatically we know it's not nominal, right? Because the number means at least more. And the interval between 1 cookie and 2 cookies is the same amount. It's 1 cookie because the cookie is a standardized unit, right? And 0 means 0 cookies. So if you ate 0 Oreos, that means 0 cookies. So based on that, I think you can answer the question. Likert items, or Likert if you want to say Likert. Likert items result in what kind of data? All right, so first you have to think about what a Likert item is. Likert items are ones that have the strongly agree, neutral, slightly disagree, that one. Do we know that the interval between moderately agree and strongly agree is the same as the interval between slightly agree and moderately agree? We don't know that. We know that strongly agree is more than moderately agree, but we don't know if the interval is exactly the same. So with that in mind, I think you can answer the question. All right, which of the following is not an operationalization? Okay, now, operationalizations have to be either a measurement or a manipulation. So the question here is, which one of these is not a measurement or a manipulation? That's the way you should read that. So let's look at A. I asked all the participants in my study to wear a blindfold. Is that a measurement? No, it's not a measurement. Is it a manipulation? And the answer is no, it is not a manipulation. Now you say, well, why? You're manipulating, you're changing something, aren't you? The problem with the manipulation has to have at least 2 levels, right? It has to have something to compare itself to, or else we don't have a manipulation going on. We just have a control, okay? It'd be the same as saying, oh, everybody has to come into the lab. If everybody does it, it's controlling other variables. It's not actually changing a variable that we can compare. If I asked half of the students to wear a blindfold, the other half not to, that would be a manipulation. But if everybody does it, it's not a manipulation, it's a control. So in this one, B, I assign half my participants to eat squid and the other half to eat chips. That is a manipulation, right? Half are eating squid, half are eating chips. C, I observe how many times people fall asleep in class. That's a measurement, right? I count how many is going on and I observe it. D, I ask people to indicate which brand of toothpaste they prefer. That's also a measurement. I say, tell me which one you like, and I measure it. So A is the correct answer. It is not a measurement or a manipulation. 9, I perform my research in order to get people to click on more of my advertisements. This is an example of what kind of research. Okay, so basic research is one where you're learning just for learning's sake. Applied is when you start with a problem. Translational is when you have a problem and you use basic research to apply it, well, translate it to a problem. And a meta-analysis is just when you compile a bunch of old studies and statistically analyze them to see if there is an effect going on. So in this case, we are starting with a problem. And the problem is I need people to click on my advertisements. 10, internal reliability is measured using which one of these? Now remember, internal reliability is whether or not items in a scale. So we're only talking about self-report scales, right? A scale is multiple self-report items that measure the same concept. Internal reliability is seeing, do all of the items in the scale correlate with each other? If that is the case, then we would be using Cronbach's alpha. Effect size is what is the effect of one variable on another. And we only really talked about effect size in this class when we've been talking about a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis will actually compute an effect size of one variable on another based off of past research. Type 1 error has to do with if you reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is actually true. That's a type 1 error. And Pearson's R correlation, that's the one-way correlation, right? So we got a scatter plot and we put a line through it. That's Pearson's R. When we normally talk about correlation, that's Pearson's R. Internal reliability is measured using Cronbach's alpha. All right, now for the rest of these, starting with question 11, we're going to use a scenario. And you'll know that in all of my exams, I like to use scenarios, so get used to this. Let's read it together. Researchers wanted to test whether sleep causes people to feel anxious. Now, the first thing you do when you look at that is you notice what is the hypothesis. The hypothesis is that sleep is going to cause anxiety. Specifically, they believe that getting less than 8 hours of sleep will cause people to be more anxious. Notice that specific prediction. That's the hypothesis. Getting less than 8 hours of sleep is going to cause you to be more anxious. They collect a sample of 100 participants. Each participant is assigned to either sleep 3 hours, 8 hours, or 12 hours each day for 1 month. So notice there are 3 groups, right? You either go to sleep 3 hours, 8 hours, or 12 hours. Then each participant's asked to respond to the following. I feel worried a lot, strongly agree to strongly disagree. I am an anxious person, strongly agree to strongly disagree. Researchers assigned a number to the amount of agreement and added the 2 scores together to get the participant's anxiety score. So let's kind of map out what's going on with this particular study. So for this one, the diagram would look like this. So I have one variable, which is sleep, that I think is causing a change in another variable, conceptual variable, anxiety. Now notice how they said cause. We specifically know that this is going to be an experiment because of that word cause, right? At least they should set it up like that. And we also know that it is an experiment because they have a manipulation. They had people sleep for either, let's see, what is it? 3 hours, 8 hours, or group 3 is 12 hours. Right? 1 group, 2 groups, 3 groups. The first group has 3 hours of sleep. Second group has 8 hours of sleep. Third group has 12 hours of sleep. That's what that says. Then the anxiety, did they manipulate it? No, they didn't manipulate it. They measured it. How did they measure it? They measured it using this anxiety scale. They had a self-report measure. And if you look at this, what they did is they assigned numbers to the greatest amount of agreement. So that means that this is going to be a 4, 3, a 2, and a 1. 4, 3, 2, 1. So if somebody goes in there and says, I feel worried a lot, oh, I agree, then they would get a score of a 3 for that item. And 2, I'm an anxious person, oh, strongly agree, they would get a 4. They added the 2 scores together to get the participant's anxiety score. This particular participant would get a score of 7. That would be their score. That's how that works. So what they would do then is they compare the people who have slept for 3 hours compared to the ones who have slept 8 hours and the ones who have slept 12 hours to see if their scores were significantly different. That's what they would do. Okay, question 11. Which of the following is true? So the study has no hypothesis. That's not true. We saw the hypothesis is right here. They believe that getting less than 8 hours of sleep will cause people to feel more anxious. So that can't be the right answer. The researchers made a type 1 error. Well, to make a type 1 error, you have to reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is actually true. Did they do that? We don't know. We have no idea what their conclusion is. They don't tell us what their conclusion is, so that can't be right either. The researchers cannot test internal reliability in the study. Can they test internal reliability? Internal reliability is when you compare the items in a self-report scale, and we have items in a self-report scale, so we can. So C can't be correct. The study can show that lack of sleep causes anxiety. The answer is yes, D. That is correct. It can show, so it is true that this study can show that lacking sleep causes anxiety. Why? Because this is an experiment. That's why. The study in this scenario is all right. Correlational studies measure and measure. That means they would measure sleep and measure anxiety and see if the people who happen to sleep more also have higher anxiety. An experiment is one where you manipulate the independent variable sleep and measure anxiety. A frequency study only measures one variable, and a meta-analysis takes a bunch of different studies and chunks them together to see if what the effect is. So, based off that information, which one is correct? 13. In this scenario, anxiety is, so if you look right here, let's talk about the difference here. All right, an independent variable is the one that causes the change in a dependent variable. So Is anxiety causing a change in sleep? Nope. Anxiety is an operationalization. Well, look, operationalizations are squares and conceptual variables are circles. Anxiety is a circle. A conceptual variable. Is anxiety a conceptual variable? Well, if it's in a circle, then yeah. Well, you also know that it's the concept being changed, right? Yeah, it is. A confound. Now, what's a confound? A confound is something that creates the change in the independent variable that is not the independent variable. So anxiety is the dependent variable. It can't be a confound. So the answer in that one is C. It's a conceptual variable. 14. Which of the following occurs with the study's measurement? Okay. Which one could occur with the measurement? Could we get observer effects? Well, the measurement in this case, if you remember, is a scale. So there's no observers. So you can't have observer effect. And you also can't have observer bias. Not going to happen. Reactivity? Well, reactivity, you can't have that either because that's for observational measures. And what about acquiescence? Yes, you can have acquiescence. Acquiescence is the yay saying or nay saying. It's when you just strongly agree or strongly disagree to everything. So that is correct. Number 15. How many items are in the scenario? All right, well, let's take a look. An item is like a question, except that it doesn't have to be a question. It could be a question, doesn't have to be. I feel worried a lot, that's an item. I'm an anxious person, that's another item. 1, 2 items. 2. 16. I believe that wearing uncomfortable clothes causes you to be more anxious. Since people sleep in their pajamas, they spend more time in comfortable clothes the more they sleep. It's the clothes, not the sleep, that causes anxiety. This concern questions the study's what? All right, let's go through these. Let's go through them backwards. Criterion validity is when you have a specific behavior that's compared to your measure. The measure in this one is the scale. It's those 2 items that say I'm an anxious person, right, that one. So we would be looking at a specific behavior that's connected with the measurement of that in that particular scale. That's not what's going on here. We're not looking at a specific behavior and trying to correlate it. That's not what's happening. External validity says, do the results of this study apply in the outside world? Well, in this case, we're not saying that we're worried about what's going on in the outside world. We're saying we're concerned about what's going on inside of the study. So that's not correct. B, content validity. Content validity is asking, are we looking at all of the aspects of the conceptual variable? And the conceptual variable in this case that we'd be measuring is going to be is anxiety. So that could be a concern for this study, but that's not what's going on in the scenario in question 16, right? We're worried about whether comfortable clothes are causing the change. Internal validity is the one where it says, does the independent variable actually cause a change in the dependent variable? So if I think that comfort is causing a change in anxiety, not sleep, then that would be a question of internal validity. 17, the scenario above does not include a measurement. Well, does it include a measurement? Did we measure anxiety? We did measure anxiety with the scale, remember? A manipulation. Do we have a manipulation? Yes, we randomly assigned people to either sleep 3 hours, 8 hours, or 12 hours. So we manipulated, we changed that. That's a manipulation. An operationalization. Any measurement or manipulation is an operationalization. We have a measurement and a manipulation, so yeah, we have 2 different operationalizations. An observation. An observation is an observational measure. There's no observational measures here, so the correct answer is D. 18, which of the following would you not be able to determine in the scenario above? Could you determine internal reliability? Yes, we've already determined that, right? With Cronbach's alpha, we can test whether the items correlate with each other. Test, retest reliability. Would we be able to do that? Well, theoretically, yeah, we would be able to. If they took the test again, we would be able to do that. Inter-rater reliability. In no place do we have any observations. So there's really no way that we can have inter-rater reliability. Even if we did the test again, we wouldn't be able to do it because there's no observation. And so we can't have inter-rater reliability. Number 19. The scenario includes which of the following response scales? Is it Likert, semantic differential, open-ended, forced choice? Which one is it? Now, in this particular question, there are actually two correct answers. The response scale is the way you reply to the item. So here's the item, I feel worried a lot, and there's the response scale. Strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree. If you're forced to choose one of those, then that's forced choice. And particularly if you have strongly agree to strongly disagree, those are Likert type items. In this particular case, both forced choice and Likert type items would be correct. All right, new scenario. I have a hypothesis that having long hair makes you more extroverted. I sample 100 undergraduate students at the University of Colorado. I measure each person's hair in inches. Then I ask the students to mark the number that best describes them for extroversion and shyness. Participant scores with an average to get one extroversion score. My prediction is the study will have longer hair, will have higher extroversion score. So let's go ahead and diagram this one. We have, I have a hypothesis that having long hair makes you more extroverted. So we have two conceptual variables. Get them to go here. Come on. Get my pen to work. This is hair length. And this is extroversion. So before we get into the arrows, let's look at our operationalization. So first of all, hair length. What did we do? I measure each person's hair length in inches. So I get out a ruler, and in inches, I measure. So this arrow goes down. And they measured the hair length. And then what about the anxiety? Well, they responded to these two items right there. So there's an anxiety scale that we gave them. When you measure and measure, that is not an experiment, that's a correlational design, so we cannot show causation. We don't know if extroversion causes you to have longer hair, or longer hair causes you to have extroversion. We don't know which way it would go. It's a correlational design. So, question 20. The study in the scenario is correlational. It's not an experiment because we didn't manipulate your hair length. We could manipulate your hair length. Theoretically, we'd just go in and chop people's hair off, right? Randomly assign you to have a certain specific hair length. But we didn't do that. We just measured. So it can't be an experiment. It's a correlational study. It's not a frequency study because we don't have just one variable involved. We have multiple variables. And it's definitely not a meta-analysis. In this scenario, extroversion is a circle. So it's in circles, and squares are operationalizations. And this particular circle is not making a change in the other one. So it's being measured as part of the study. So which one is it? Circles are always what? 22. I'm concerned that my measure of extroversion doesn't actually measure extroversion. Well, that would be a problem with which one? Construct, statistical, internal, or external validity. Construct validity is asking, does the operationalization actually operationalize what it's the conceptual variable? It's saying, does the measure measure what it's claiming to measure? Or does the manipulation manipulate what it claims to manipulate? So if I don't think that my measure of extroversion actually measures extroversion, then that would be a problem with construct validity. How many scales are in the scenario? Scales are multiple self-report items that measure the same concept. So look right here. Here's one item. Here's two items. Multiple self-report items that measure the same concept. But a scale is all of the items together is one scale. These two items make up one scale of extroversion. One scale. 24. In this scenario, which of the following could be tested for convergent validity? All right, the conceptual independent variable. The conceptual independent variable in this case is hair length, right? So would we be testing that for convergent validity, the conceptual variable? No, we wouldn't do that. We would only test convergent validity with any operationalization that we're looking for. Would we look at the operationalization of the independent variable, like measuring it in inches? Well, convergent validity is meant for scales, right, where we're testing one scale compared to another established scale and seeing if they converge. So measuring it with a ruler doesn't make sense in this particular case. Conceptual dependent variable. We never do convergent validity with the conceptual variable, only with the operationalizations. The operationalization of the dependent variable, well, we have a scale of anxiety, and there's other established scales that are correlated with anxiety, so D is the right answer. 25, the scenario above does not include the possibility of which one of those? All right, is there any observation going on? If there's not, then there's not going to be any observer bias. Acquiescence is just answering on one side or the other of the scale, right, in the response scale. Fence sitting is in the middle of the scale. Internal reliability is comparing all the items in the scale to each other to see if they correlate. So since there's no observation, there would be no possibility of observer bias. 26. The scenario includes which of the following response scales? So let's take a look at this. Here's the response scales: introverted to extroverted, 1 through 6. Shy to outgoing, 1 through 6. Do we have anything that says like or dislike? Well, or agree or disagree, I mean, then that can't be a Likert scale. Do we have two different ends of a semantic meaning, and you could choose from the two ends? And that is a semantic differential. It is also forced choice, however, because you're forced to choose one of the numbers that's going on. 27. How many levels of the independent variable are there in the scenario above? The answer is there are no levels in this particular independent variable because it's not an independent variable, right? There's no manipulation. So this particular, this one doesn't have an independent variable, and so it can't have levels. It doesn't have a manipulation is what I'm saying. So it can't have a true independent variable, and therefore it doesn't have levels. How many operationalizations are there in the scenario above? Well, operationalizations are measures or manipulations. So when you look at this diagram right here, how many measures do you see? 1, 2. So we have 2 different operationalizations. Okay, the rest don't require any scenario. 29. Which of these is not associated with construct validity? And the answer is, well, discriminant validity is part of construct validity. Convergent validity is part of construct validity. Internal reliability is part of construct validity. External validity is not associated with construct validity. Number 30, if you give a participant a scale measuring racism, you'd probably need to worry about, well, you don't need to worry about observer bias because a scale is a self-report measure. You don't need to worry about observer effects because a scale is a self-report measure. The 3 R's, that's to do with animal research, and we're not probably giving the scale to an animal. So social desirability responding is when people know that they should respond a specific way. So for example, racism, people don't go in there and say, yes, I'm a racist. They don't do that because it's not socially desirable. Okay, now we're going to review the open-ended questions, which we didn't talk about in the numbers. So besides multiple choice and multiple answer type questions, there are going to be some other ones as well. You've seen some of these already in the diagrams, and you'll need to be able to recognize a diagram, a correct diagram for sure. But A, why are theories so important for research? Well, theories are so important for research because they come up with so many hypotheses. They can be refined based off of the results. So we care about theories because they can be refined and because they lead to multiple hypotheses. If everybody just kind of goes out there and says, oh, I want to just study Facebook, and they just study Facebook, there's no hypothesis. There's no way that we can actually grow the knowledge. We just know something about Facebook, which doesn't help us. We want things that can be falsifiable, but also can be expanded upon based on the research and lead to new and interesting hypotheses. Explain the difference between review journal articles and meta-analysis. A review journal article is one that reviews all of the different studies that have been done on a specific topic, so we know where we are in the field. A meta-analysis does that too, except it does it statistically. It takes all those past studies and takes the statistics from them to see how big of an effect than an independent variable has on a dependent variable. So the difference is the statistics. A meta-analysis uses statistics to find specific effect size, whereas a journal article just reviews, a review journal article just reviews what we know about the subject. We've already done the diagram for number C, so you recognize that. How would I test criterion validity for an operationalization in this study? Now, this study is talking about the first study we went through, which is sleep causing a change in anxiety. So criterion validity is looking specifically at the measurement that we have, all right? The measurement that we specifically have here is the anxiety scale. So what we need to do is we need to find a criterion, which is a behavior that should be correlated with the anxiety scale. So if somebody has higher anxiety, and we know from past research that anxiety is related to higher amounts of, fill in the blanks. So maybe we know that higher amounts of anxiety is also related to higher amounts of depression. So we have the same people take the anxiety scale as well as a depression scale. And if they correlate with each other, then we know that is good evidence that we're actually measuring what we want to measure. E, give an example of concerns for construct validity for each of the operationalizations in this study. So going back to the study, the two operationalizations are the manipulation of our sleep and then measurement of anxiety. Construct validity is saying, hey, do these operationalizations really reflect the conceptual variable? So for example, when you have people sleep or put in a 3-hour, 8-hour, 12-hour group, is that really changing the amount of sleep that they have? Well, let's say that if you put somebody in a room with a bed, we don't know whether or not they're actually sleeping, right? So let's say you just put them in a room with a bed for either 3 hours, 8 hours, or 12 hours. So maybe what you're doing is, we can't be sure that they're actually sleeping that amount of time. Maybe you're just manipulating boredom and not actually sleep. If you're manipulating boredom and not actual sleep, that would be a problem with the construct validity of this manipulation. If the anxiety scale is really not measuring anxiety, if instead it's measuring something like social desirability, or if it's just saying, hey, maybe it's measuring self-esteem instead of anxiety, that would be a problem with the construct validity of our anxiety scale. So construct validity can be for either a manipulation or for a measurement. We tend to talk about it more with measurements, though. F was the new scenario, diagram the study. This is the hair length and extroversion. It's the one we did. G, what would be an example of a type 2 error in this study? So a type 2 error is when you fail to reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is actually false. The null hypothesis here would be that your hair length has nothing to do at all with your extroversion, okay? So that's the null hypothesis. Failing to reject the null hypothesis means that we can't reject that. It means that we didn't find anything. We can't say hair length has anything to do with it. That's failing to reject. So if we go out there and say, you know what, we didn't find any connection between hair length and extroversion, but in reality, hair length does change extroversion, then that would be a type 2 error. H, can a negative correlation show convergent validity? The answer is yes. So let's say that, for example, we were testing our anxiety scale. Well, if we can have the same people take the anxiety scale as well as something that is the opposite of anxiety, right? So let's say that we know that people who are high in anxiety are less extroverted. So if people took the anxiety scale and the extroversion scale, we would assume that people with higher anxiety would be lower in extroversion. That would be a negative correlation, but it would show convergent validity. The things that are, convergent validity is the scale correlated with other scales that it's supposed to be correlated with. Describe an example of observer bias. Observer bias is when the observer is biased and wants to see in the participant the outcome that they want. So if I am looking, let's say I have a hypothesis that people who wear glasses are better looking. Well, then if I know what the hypothesis is, I might like say, oh, well, that person has glasses. That person, oh, I think that person's an 8. And I might be biased in the way I observe or measure their attractiveness because I want the people with glasses to be more attractive. That would be observer bias. Last one. Why was Milgram's famous study not an experiment? The answer is because there's only one operationalization. We only measured their obedience. There's actually no manipulation there. There's no other thing being measured. It's just one variable, and that is obedience. That is why it is not an experiment. It is a frequency study. It makes a frequency claim, doesn't make a causal claim. All right. Good luck, everybody.